here. And that was followed up by another disappointment for me, which was tracks. Now, this was a disappointment for a number of reasons, but most of those reasons were different reasons than what I was used to. I wasn't satisfied with the engineering of this figure, nor was I satisfied with the build by any stretch of the imagination. At this point, the toy is pretty much out the window. The only thing that we see that's still relatively reminiscent to it is the white piece underneath the head is followed through in design with the blue piece underneath of his head in the MP design. Most of the inspiration here is definitely coming from the cartoon image. Now, this thing did a number of things right, and it did a number of things that we've come to expect. One of those things is it does have an interesting piece of engineering that we all kind of liked with the hand rotation and such, and that was all good. It also has that magnificent blue finish on the car, which also carries through. He's a bit slimmer than this cartoon design, but I think a lot of that has to do with the car licensing, and that's already been an issue. But an issue that we've come to expect and willing to concede to. We're still seeing a little bit of the design work come through, but it is less, but it's been on par with, I'd say, Bumblebee and probably Wheeljack. So I think aesthetically overall, even with the backpack issue, which is relatively minor, in all seriousness, the aesthetics of the backpack has not really been my issue. My issue has been that as you go to manipulate, I mean, that peekaboo is a bit much. But my issue has mainly been that as you go to manipulate the backpack or manipulate the arms, a lot of this stuff comes undone. Now, we've already discussed that none of these cars have been extremely cartoon accurate. However, none of them have that glaring hole either, even with their backpacks. And their backpacks hold together as you go to manipulate them. So it's an entirely different set of issues here. My other issue is that little stuff like that. Like, I'm just not used to that sort of inconsistency in a masterpiece. And ultimately, the way that I started viewing Takara Tomy's masterpiece had now changed. Why? Because we went from figures that I loved, Masterpiece Soundwave being the pinnacle of that love, to sort of a slow decline from there, but not immediately. We start to see little hints of it with Wheeljack. It follows through a bit with Bumblebee. It sort of really picks up steam with Ultra Magnus, and then Star Saber, and now this. Now, had this been released before those prior disappointments, this probably would have struck me differently. But by this point, I'm starting, I think personally, to get nervous about the line, the direction it's heading, and its quality and standard. And then this fella. Now, I've talked about this guy a lot. So let's talk about the toy real quick. So the G1 toy. Pretty much not there at all, with the exception of the accessories, and I think that that's appropriate. I don't think anyone wanted any of the toy look in this guy whatsoever. They did a couple gimmicky things with the accessories to make sure that it paid homage to it, and that was about the end of it. I think that was the right way to do it. Now let's talk about the cartoon. A lot more in line with the cartoon than what we've seen in previous releases. But it has been a slow burn, like the frog in the pot that hasn't noticed the water steadily increasing. The line work, almost completely non-existent. Shoulders, biceps, knees, shins, feet, thighs, smooth as a whistle. Very much in line with the cartoon imagery. Now, I think what I find irritating about this release is that while it's true to the cartoon image, we've talked about previously some of these other releases haven't been true to the cartoon image. But what they have tapped in on, what I've tried to help illustrate and reiterate and say over and over again, is it's captured those iconic pieces. Starscream's wings and shoulder pieces. Soundwave's chest and knee design. Prowl's wings and feet shape. Like all of these things that are iconic of the characters. Now, if I were to ask you, and you can feel free to say it out loud, I'll hear you in spirit, I promise. If I were to ask you, what is the most iconic thing about Ironhide? Top 2, what would you say? That's right. The head shape, especially the crest, which they nailed, and the chest. And the chest is what they got wrong. Somehow, they turned his chest into a belly. And for me, that's a bummer, because I'm not so much into the direct cartoon translation as I am for it to be in the spirit of the cartoon while capturing those iconic visual cues. And for me, and I think for most, the visual cues for Ironhide are that head, especially with the crest, namely the helmet, let's say, and the chest. But because of the angle of the chest slumps down and then it turns into a giant stomach. And that's just not how I've ever imagined the character to look. And for me, they took a character that almost had like a Superman style build, you know, where he's just been slinging haystacks his whole life and just got that huge barrel chest. and they turned him into sort of a tubby couch potato, which is just, for me, sort of a deal breaker aesthetically. Now let me explain just one step further. Prow. Now, Prow breaks a lot of his G1 cartoon rules. There's line work everywhere. I have my room finished downstairs, and a lot of this caught drywall dust. There's line work everywhere. The shape of the chest is also different, but the shape of the chest is still in the spirit of the original. It's the same build in a different shape. This is a different build in a different shape. This Prow has a chest that is slightly more boxy than a round chest that he had in the cartoon. This chest has turned into a stomach. And it's just two different things. We're talking about two different style chests versus a different chest and a different stomach. So for me, while this is truer to the cartoon, it actually does a poorer job of capturing the aesthetic and the spirit of the character. And those same sorts of issues pretty much continued over into this fella. And that is to say, we changed character design elements, and as a result, it left people relatively unimpressed. The issue here wasn't the paint, it's there. It wasn't the engineering, that remains. The build still seems slightly less, but the big issue here was that we're going for this hyper cartoon look, except the chest and abdomen aren't right. They're almost non-existent. Once again, it's the same area that Ironhide failed in. And when you're going for this hyper-tuned look, when something is off, it seems way off. And that's why the chest and abdomen area seems so absurd, because the rest of the toy is pretty much right off of the screen. There should be an indentation. There should be a defining line between chest and abs. But instead, we get a very cardboard-looking figure as a result. But stay tuned, because we're getting ready to see a figure that nails every cartoon aesthetic, but lets everything else go. Now, from Hot Rod to this, we see a change. And this, to me, is the lowest common denominator of sort of the new route that they took. Now, that's not to say that I hate this toy, because I don't. I think that the character does come through well in it. I just think that if I were to look at this without my own bias, because I'm a Transformer fan as well, but if I was to look at this without my own bias and just critique it, I would say that this had really reached sort of the bottom of what Masterpiece was willing to give us as product. The price was high. The build isn't the greatest. The engineering is good. The plastic seemed different. Still seems different to me. And I'm touching all of these guys today, so it's really come across the change in plastic. The paint is almost completely absent. The line work is almost completely absent. I'm almost willing to say that with the exception of the engineering, the line work really isn't there at all. So it's very true to the cartoon. But as a result, it's lost an awful lot of things that have kind of made me personally love Masterpiece from its inception. So if we're to look at this and look at that, what looks more visually interesting? And why? Would you say it's the paint? I would agree. Would you say it's the extra sculpt and line work? I would agree. Would you say it's also just the flat character design? Sure, I'd agree with that as well. But you can't deny that the extra bells and whistles create a stronger presentation of a figure than one without it. We also saw the strange switch to stickers. Now, of course, it's trying to appease everyone and how they view the symbols, but you know what? Maybe that's what's wrong with the world. Maybe we try too hard to make everyone happy instead of making a decision and expecting you to deal with it. They made the decision to do away with paint and they expected us to deal with it. So why couldn't they make the decision to paint the Decepticon symbol on there? Maybe they shouldn't pay any attention to any sort of fan entitlement. And they should just say, look, this is the design we're going with, and as a result, we're painting the symbols here. But this is also an interesting release because it's the first time that people took this and they took the third-party equivalent and said, you know what? I'm not sure which one I like better. And that, in my opinion, is a pivotal piece of Transformer history. Because it is the first time that an unofficial product released at least 1 year, if not 2 years prior, went toe-to-toe with the Takara product. And I would say that the fan reaction was at least 50-50 split on it. So what does the Fanstoys one do differently? Well, it has more paint. Doesn't have a finish either, though. Has more paint. The materials feel better. Had die cast. Had interesting engineering as well. Tons of sculpt work. Tons of line work. And I think it did enough where people were like, I'm not sure if a straight adaptation of the cartoon image is necessarily what I want. Honestly, what looks more interesting, that or this? But things do get better, and we have these guys. Now, as you can see, both are definitely still ignoring the toy for the most part and staying true to the cartoon imagery. And as a result, we get a lot less line work, we get a lot less sculpt work, and we get a much more simpler design. But the good news is, these did return to the idea of painting the toy, which is nice to see. And I think the saving grace was that the engineering was so much more interesting than anything we had seen prior that we really appreciated the effort here. And I think that effort is a big word. I think that effort really comes through. Now, I think that this is an acceptable toy, but I still don't enjoy this as much as I do their initial 10 releases, you know, and maybe 10 is even too much, but pretty much from MP10 through Bumblebee. I do think that the evolution has changed to a point where we have come to expect less. I think we did used to expect some sort of weight. I think we did used to expect heavy paint. I think we did used to expect interesting sculpts while staying true to the silhouette and iconic physical attributes of the character. And we've kind of traded all that in for it to look as though it walked off the screen. So I guess my question is, how good are these initial designs that you want them to walk right off the screen? Will any of you say that this piece of art regarding Inferno is better than any other piece of art you've ever seen regarding Inferno? You know, I think that we've all said, you know, I want it to look just like the cartoon. I want it to look just like the cartoon. But I think we have to admit, maybe not all of us, certainly, it's certainly a subjective thing, that there is something lost there. That we do trade in a physical attribute and certainly a regard to presentation when we start looking at something that was drawn probably relatively inexpensive in order to stay on budget to translate to something that we're spending a lot of money to look at all the time. And I think they have lost their unique ability to take something that was classic, update it without going beyond the elements of what define that character. And I think it's been such a slow turning up of the heat that we haven't really noticed it. But I can tell you, while I've been going through this today, I have definitely noticed it. There is a change in plastic, there is a change in build, there is a change in weight, there is a change in presentation, there's a change in sculpt, there's a change in line work, there's changes everywhere. And I'm not entirely sure that I am completely satisfied with those changes. But I will admit, the one thing that has stayed relatively consistent is their ability to provide interesting, unique, and inspiring elements of their engineering. That is one thing they've never really lost. So in closing, I'd just like to say it was interesting for me to do this because putting my hands on all these guys in sequential order and kind of seeing the change and evolution of this line, it has been interesting, I must admit. But, you know, these are all the major G1 releases mold-wise. And what's interesting is I think we have seen a slow decline in some regards, but just in many regards, not so much a decline as just a change in approach. Now, whether or not that change in approach is for you, I can't decide that. It's a very subjective thing. However, I can say that I'm not entirely enthused with it. We've seen Masterpiece start out as something innovative that was very concerned with sort of checking all the collector boxes, whether it be die-cast or chrome or line work, sculpt work, paint work, giving it its own official and unique look while staying true to the iconic aspects of the character designs from the original cartoon, rubbing your nostalgia button with a bit of engineering, and surprising you with innovative ways to accomplish the transformations. And throughout this process, we've seen them slowly get away from paint, but then have a bit of a renaissance in regards to it. We've seen them slowly get away from die-cast. We've seen them slowly get away from unique designs and trade that approach in for a very screen-accurate design. The problem with that for me is that I think that Masterpiece Soundwave, Masterpiece Optimus Prime, Masterpiece Prowl, Masterpiece Wheeljack, Masterpiece Starscream even, are more interesting looking designs than those designs straight from the cartoon. The question is, do we have ourselves to blame for that? Did we cry and complain and moan until they took away every little bit of decor and replaced it with smooth painted panels? And that may be our fault. But like I previously stated, the one thing that has stayed true to the line is their interesting and innovative approach to engineering. But the problem is that El Total, right? Allow me to get fancy. Masterpiece has by and large been the standard. It's been the bar. It's been that almost like the gods from Olympus. And you should never even attempt to reach out and touch them because it's just not for you to touch God. It's all fun and games until daddy gets home. That's what we used to say about third party in regards to Masterpiece. My buddies and I, but shout out to Greg. You know, we used to always say, like, third parties can have their day. They can have fun. They can make whatever they want. They can push the envelope. By all means, please do. But when daddy comes home, it's time to clean up the mess. And I'm not sure that we can say that anymore. Case in point, have we seen a third party Masterpiece Soundwave make any noise? Nah. Why? Because this one is so bloody good. It's so perfect that you can't imagine any sort of competition for it. Not worthwhile competition anyway. But that's a Masterpiece hot rod, ladies and gents. And we got a Masterpiece hot rod coming from a third-party company later this year. And there's a market for it. So what does that mean? It means that fans, by and large, or at least a significant amount, whereas it's beneficial for a company to make one, aren't satisfied with the official release. So, in closing, I want to say I love Masterpiece. I will continue to support them. I'm looking forward to looking at Megatron next week. There's some changes that they have made that other third parties haven't made, and we're going to have a long discussion about that, and I'm looking forward to it. I hope you are as well. But the truth is that I think Masterpiece is still setting the standard. The problem is it a standard that I want them to set? Do I want these other third-party companies following suit and making straight, plain-looking figures? I'm not sure I do. But I hope that they continue to succeed. I hope they continue to release G1 figures, and I hope that they also can present a little bit more of an inspiring figure. I hope they can get back to the days of when they release something that is just unparalleled. And you can't imagine any worthwhile competition striking at the heart of it. Because right now, I feel like they're not quite there. I can tell you, I don't have any need to buy another Masterpiece Soundwave. I don't have any other need to buy a Masterpiece Prow or Wheeljack or even Bumblebee, truth be told. But you'd probably tempt me with an Ironhide. You'd probably tempt me with the Trax. You'd probably tempt me with the Hot Rod, etc. So that's what I'm getting at. Maybe they're still setting the bar, but maybe that bar isn't as high as it used to be. So thanks for all you guys that stuck with it. I know it's a long video, but there was a lot to talk about, and I really wanted to show the evolution of things. I got most of my pictures, I think, from Sabertron.com. Shout out to them. I don't think they show me a whole ton of love, but still shout out to them anyway. There's some good pictures over there. And once again, just as a reminder, I don't reply to any of these comments. The discussion videos are the only videos I don't reply to comments on, but I am interested to read yours. Anytime I'm critical of Masterpiece, I know people get all sorts of emotional, but maybe if you can keep your big old adult feelings under control, you can create a mature and reasonable response that would be interesting for me to read. That being said, I'll be back Friday. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.